We're here because of the fellowship recipients. So I want to introduce, two of them are here anyway so far, and that's Rebecca Desnotny and Jory Matthews. And in fact, the two of you have the first row, and from here we would encounter a multitude of spider wort, more than I've ever seen in prior years. It stretches, it lines both sides of the bike path as if you were approaching Versailles along the avenue there. And Versailles looked like this at one time before it became Versailles. And I'm glad that our watershed has remained, where the flowers are not as formal, where deer, coyote, rabbits, geese, ducks, butterflies, turtles, coarse, and bullfrogs play, and where you don't have to be king to hunt. One correction to today's agenda, I think you're all aware of, but Lauren Bumba will be with us in spirit only. And Jamie Boberick of Friends of Indian Creek has agreed to join us for lunch to answer questions you might have in Lauren's absence. All speakers will introduce themselves, except for Lauren, of course, and Marianne. Here's Marianne.
Well, hello. Welcome to Eggers Woods. I'm Marianne Poslowski. I'm a volunteer steward with the Cook County Forest Preserve System. In Cook County, forest preserves actually encompass nearly 70,000 acres. It's about 11% of Cook County, and there is nothing like it in the country. This is an enormous set-aside that was really, really prescient thinking on the part of Daniel Burnham and a bunch of other people, probably about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. The Forest Preserve District celebrated its centenary, I think in 1913 or 14. That this is a candidate site for a prescribed burn. In fact, because of work the district has been doing, again, hard by the Burnham Greenway, they cleared, at the Burnham Greenway, they discovered a remnant prairie, and it had grown up with non-native, various non-native trees, as well as very aggressive native trees like green ash and the non-native mulberry. And they tore all that stuff out. They came through and they took it all out. And the result is the remnant prairie really has started coming back. Burning actually helps control poison ivy. Oftentimes by the time the students are out here, poison ivy has generally, the leaves have fallen off, they're dressed in long pants, and so everyone is safe. But we have various vines here. This one is Virginia creeper growing up this black cherry tree. But there's also, I see poison ivy on it. So poison ivy is not something you just worry about on the ground. I have seen poison ivy branches coming off of a vine on a tree that extend better than 3 feet in all directions. So you think you're being slapped by a branch of the tree, and you're not. You've just run into poison ivy. So there are dangers. I mean, well, I don't know, dangers, annoyances. One must be careful in the woods, but you know, we take all those precautions with our students. And it has a nice little population of common milkweed. By the way, this has got a tremendously beautiful scent. If you have never sniffed milkweed, I recommend that you do that because it's really, really, it's really wonderful.
Hummingbirds love it at this time of...
Yep. Okay, this plant, this unassuming little plant, is called seed box. And that is either a 6 or 7 on the coefficient scale. And I'm amazed that it has come back this fast right here. This just goes to show the resiliency of the landscape. I think some scientists have said they believe that wetland seeds are viable much, much longer, like 70 years or so. so that they just wait, and once conditions are good for them, they will come back. Maybe that's what's happening here. This is really amazing. I'm going to have to tell Dan Spencer, the regional ecologist I work with. He's going to be very happy to know that. Also in here along the edge is nodding burr marigold, another good conservative species. We have Carex camosa, bristly sedge, and we have a good thistle, Cirsium muticum, which attracts moths. I saw a moth that looked as big as a bird on it one day. Tried to get its picture, got it kind of. All right, someplace out there is a beaver lodge. It was much more evident in winter. I'm not sure exactly where out there, but
Calumet River's right over there. Lake Michigan would come right up the Calumet River for miles, and Lake Michigan fish would come up the river along with it. And then when the winds died down, that water would go back out, and the Calumet River water would once again flow into Lake Michigan, and the Calumet River fish would once again take over the river. So there was this really weird dynamic that was set up just by a wind, because everything is so very flat around here. Now, if nothing significant had happened, over time, Wolf Lake would have filled in, would have turned into a meadow, would have become a savanna, eventually a forest, something like that. But things changed, and one of the major things that changed was around 150, 200 years ago with the founding of Chicago and the massive influx of people into the region, who obviously started changing a lot of stuff around here. And some of the things they started to do was fill in portions of the lake or dig ditches to drain out portions of the lake, sort of drying it all out. And at that time, Wolf Lake sort of shrank. And once again, how much is hard to tell because you get a fuzzy wetland, you don't really know where it began to start. But you start to get these hardened borders, more similar to what we see right here. Early 1900s, let's see here, the first line that you can kind of see over there is actually a railroad track, so they built a railroad through the middle of the lake. And then the next major development was between 1954 and 1956, and that was the construction of Interstate 90, the Skyway, which I can just barely see over here. If you go over there, take a peek, I think everybody here probably knows about the Skyway. That's right through the middle of the lake. So that was constructed in 1954 through 1956, more or less. Now, obviously, the physical footprint of the interstate through the lake has impacted it, but what had a much larger impact is to construct it not only there but elsewhere. They needed a lot of sand, gravel, that sort of stuff.
Place to look. Has great birds as well. You know, a lot in these swales you could find marsh birds, wading birds, that type of thing. In the lake you find the diving ducks and that kind of thing. And then because there's sort of so much brush in here, you have this group of birds called shrubland birds that do really well here. Some of the rarer ones like yellow-breasted chat and little flycatcher and sedge wrens and marsh wrens and that kind of thing are all kind of scattered throughout this habitat. Which actually I usually don't see these. One of the weirder plants out here is we have prickly pear cactus. So that's a pretty neat plant. You have to look more for anywhere where the sand's a little bit disturbed. If you get this much growth, it covers it up. That's wild indigo out there. That's a plant that like First Peoples used for dyeing clothes and things of that sort. Has a few medicinal values as well as, you know, milkweed, as you guys see everywhere. A lot of little blue stem. There's prairie cordgrass back in the swale, as you saw it, and a whole ton of sedges, 22 species of sedges growing in the wetlands out here. Fairly spectacular on the plant side.
Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is in this particular area, obviously, you know, we're looking at a very interesting water body behind us. The Wolf Lake region has, as you've already learned, a really diverse and interesting history with contamination, with changing of the hydrology, with land use. But it's not unique to this area. We have a lot of wetlands throughout this country, throughout the world, that have been just profoundly altered, contaminated, and changed. And they aren't just vulnerable to climate change. They, in turn, affect the way that our climate is changing in and of itself. Now, I will talk about that. there are three things when it comes to climate change that I want to make sure we talk about and I want you to remember, and that is water quantity, water quality, and water timing. So we're going to talk about the amount, the quality, and the seasonality of these changes and how climate change is affecting all three. And then finally, I will round out with questions, especially about resilience.
I'm just mostly concerned about the level of Lake Michigan and its effect on everything else around here, including, this is the highest that Wolf Lake's been in since I've been around.
Yeah.
Highest level, and it so it, yeah, so that, yeah. So what's the future?
So, and let me know, Phil, if you've already talked about this a little bit, but
You know, I didn't talk about climate change at all, really.
what about Lake Michigan?
No, not really.
Okay.
I talked about geomorphology and stuff,
Okay.
not climate.
So the science, the most recent science, and we looked at this extensively when we were developing the adaptation plans in this area. One of the more intriguing things about Lake Michigan is how the people who've been studying it for decades and modeling the lake levels have kind of come to the conclusion that while climate change is having an impact, it's really sort of hard to determine exactly what that impact is, much harder than they had originally thought. So trends they thought they saw in lake level being affected by climate change, it's too soon to make judgments about that. In theory, they could talk about how it might be affected by climate change, but there are other factors affecting the lake level themselves. Now, as far as like how temperatures affect the lake, that's a completely separate thing, but I'm just going to talk about the levels. So this is already higher than they would have thought it was going to go, but they also, we have 30-year cycles and some other cycles on those where it goes up, and I'm sure if you've been here long enough, you've seen that. It goes up, it goes down. Other factors that climate change affect with the lake levels themselves have a little more to do with that timing I was talking about. So one example would be if you're in a cycle where you have high lake levels like now, and we're warming to the point where we're not getting that frozen beachfront in the winter, or the lake itself doesn't have a lot of lake ice, what can happen is the wave action and the wind can actually erode more of the beaches quicker. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's possible that contributed a little bit to what happened in northwest Indiana at the Portage Lakefront. So that's just, again, I'm not attributing that specific thing, but that's just an example of the sort of thing that can happen where climate change was a contributing factor, but not everything.
So we got 5 minutes. Can you go through a few yogas?
I would love to if you're willing.
Yeah.
Just real quick, just 5 minutes. I didn't know we were going to do this, but he asked me, so.
2 minutes ago.
Oh,
Okay, nothing crazy, just breathing and arms. So, just stand, nice and tall with your feet about hips width distance apart. Have your shoulders right above your hips. Your head just floating right on top of your shoulders there, and just close your eyes if you feel safe doing that right now. You can let your arms just kind of hang to the side nice and loose. This time, let's take them again, up and overhead. Inhale. Maybe exhale, you can bring them to heart center here, right at the center. Press your hands together. Feel free to keep your eyes open or closed now. Reach our hands back up on our inhale. Reach them nice and tall. Keep your shoulders away from your ears. And then take your right hand to your left wrist. On your next inhale, try to get a little taller. And on your exhale, take it over to your right side. So just feel a little side body stretch since we've been up and about all day.
Adults. So we have Mighty Acorns in grades 3 through 5. And that's where we take the kids outside to learn about nature. They do lessons in class, they do lessons outside, they do stewardship. So they actually go to Eggers Grove and cut buckthorn, and we have lots of cute pictures of children hauling large logs of buckthorn around. We have Earth Force for middle school, which is 6 through 8, and they do Action Civics projects, which are a pretty big deal because it helps kids. I feel like 6 through 8 is where they're really trying to figure out identity and who they are and how they fit into the world. And you can take that rebel energy and turn it towards them finding issues in their community and coming up with ways to solve it. And then we run Kimby in high school, which basically is like Mighty Acorns on steroids, hormones. So the Kimby kids learn about their environment. We've been doing a lot more self-care and cultural links. Last year, some of our Kimby interns made a concrete jungle field guide, what grows in between the cracks, and they traced the origin of lots of the weeds that we see growing in between the sidewalks, and also how people use them, which ones are edible, which ones were native, which ones were imported, exotic. And then we have our Fuego, which Fellowship, Fellows United, something for the E, growth and opportunity.